It's Florida Daily TV, brought to you by FloridaDaily.com. For all your news on politics, business, and education, it's FloridaDaily.com. Now, here's your host, Ed Dean.
Welcome to another edition of Florida Daily TV. I'm your host, publisher of FloridaDaily.com, Ed Dean. Most exciting show anywhere. Sometimes it's more exciting off the air than it is on the air. Let's get to it. Mike Synan with us. He is the chief senior political reporter for FloridaDaily.com. Claire Goforth back with us, as always, kind of representing the other side, but as a journalist as well. She's a political reporter for the Daily Dot. Go to daily.com. Why does that sound a little redundant sometimes? I kid with you. But also with NPR Radio as well. Let's get to it. I've been watching everything. I'm going to start with you first, Claire. I got a lot of clips. And some of these are very politically incorrect out there. But we saw the RNC convention. Let us go about the black vote. This is what Donald Trump said in the fall and winter of the campaign of 2016 to a black audience. This is what he said.
Look how much African-American communities have suffered under Democratic control. To those I say the following: what do you have to lose?
Now, let us go back. Here's as of this past week, Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, since that of 2008, since the election of Barack H. Obama, not the black community, but the black males. So we can always get to the black community. Black males vote for Democrats, not a big chunk, but are slowly, or they're losing, they're eradicating it, the reduction of support for those in the Democratic Party. Here's the clip.
The presidential vote among black men going back to 2008, and there has been a consistent erosion of support for the Democratic Party from black men, a high of 95% in 2008, just 80% of the vote in 2016. And there clearly was a concerted effort by the Trump campaign to try to appeal to black men.
So the erosion is the right word. I'm the biggest critic about Republicans and Democrats. Only time they want to talk about certain audiences, especially those in the black community, there's a Rosa Parks dinner. There's an NAACP. Let's buy an ad. I'm sorry. You got to be like a missionary. You got to go be out in the field 24/7, 365 out there. The black vote. I think both sides take advantage of it, but especially predominantly among those in the Democratic Party. Big concern for the Democrats that the erosion of just black men, they're starting to lose it over the last several years. Is Trump making headways or not?
I mean, that's a hard sell, honestly. I mean, for how many years Trump has been sowing racial division? Now, one thing I will agree on is that black people have suffered under both parties. I mean, there is no question about that. But really, when you look at it brass tacks-wise, when you're talking about the Trump Republican Party, that is not a party that appeals to black people because of so many messages of just hateful rhetoric.
Wait, hateful rhetoric coming from the black
Trump.
Supporters of Trump? The black supporters of Trump.
The black supporters of Trump? I mean, obviously they support him. They have their reasons for doing so. Everyone respects that. But Donald Trump repeatedly uses language that is just loaded with dog whistles and sometimes overtly racist terminology.
All right, so here's more of the clip. Listen to this one here, Mike.
To understand this, we talked to Terrence Woodbury, who's a young African-American pollster. He has been saying for months that he thinks Trump is going very hard at African-American men, particularly young. And he doesn't have to win it. He just has to tick it up a couple of points in some key places to have it count.
That is Jamal Simmons from thehill.com says Trump doesn't have to get a wide or a huge vote of those in the black community. He has to tick it up a little bit. Is this going to be enough to push him in Florida and throughout the rest of the country, Mike?
Well, it's not how much of the percentage that Donald Trump can get. It's how much of the percentage will actually turn out and support the other side. So even if Donald Trump gets the exact same, anywhere from 5 to 8% of the African-American vote, if that number is 100,000 more voters than the last time, then that spells trouble for Donald Trump. And if it's 100,000 less voters than the last time, then that's wonderful for Donald Trump. So it's much more about, it's much more about how many turn out than anything else. And when you look at the Republican strategy, when's the last time you saw a Republican event held in a high crime, low opportunity neighborhood where they talked about tax breaks that they passed called opportunity zones? Republicans are not taking the opportunity to showcase what they can do for the black community. And that's why, in large measure, the black community is not following along.
All right, let me play this clip. I'm going to start with you, Claire. At the RNC convention, every night, there was, as they say, a person of color. Those from the black community, the Hispanic community. Listen to Tiffany Cross from MSNBC said that these were nothing more than just paid black people. Quote, this was a modern-day minstrel show. Listen to this clip.
If you watched the Republican National Convention last week, you'd almost think that the Republican Party is the one welcoming people of color, given the big display of diversity. The convention featured more than a dozen African-American speakers alone. But don't be fooled that the party of Trump has suddenly warmed to the same people Trump's policies and sometimes his rhetoric directly harmed. The Republicans invited a cadre of professional black friends to validate Donald Trump and make white people feel a little less racist while still very much supporting white supremacy. I mean, I watched the Republican convention, and seeing the slew of black speakers that they had, it really did look like a modern-day minstrel show.
Wow, modern-day minstrel show. I mean, listen, I think this is entertaining for my radio show. I think this is entertaining for Florida Daily TV. I'm just follow me here, by all means. I don't want to censor them. But if this had been even let's say it had been David Webb from Fox News, a black conservative commentator, saying, well, all of those on the Dems, let's say a Hollywood actor. Technically, that is a paid professional. All it was nothing more than a modern-day minstrel show from the Democrats. Oh, my word. World War III would have been exploding at MSNBC studios. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of terminology certainly is loaded, and I think that you'd have a very rare circumstance that you could get away with using it. But, I mean, she does have a point. I mean, does the Republican Party really appeal to black people today? I mean, I cover the white supremacist issues with Daily Dot all the time. And I'm always swimming in these hate groups on Facebook just to see what kind of things they're talking about. And you know, what you hear consistently from people who use very racist language is that I'm not a racist. People like to believe that they're not racist because it's like the big bad thing that you cannot actively be. You will very rarely find someone, even someone who says some of the most racist things you could ever imagine, who really believes in their heart that that's who they are. So honestly, I do think that she was right on one point, that by putting up this parade of diverse characters up, they are really trying to appeal to white people who don't want to feel like they're racist. They don't want to feel like a vote for Trump is a vote for racism. And I mean, maybe it's an effective strategy.
I'd love to see some polling on that. Mike, you and I have known each other for a long time. I mean, if you talked about taking down Confederate flags in the state of Florida or renaming schools or renaming roads after, his name might be Jackson. It may be it could be after Michael or Tito, but I think it could be Stonewall from the Civil War. The bottom line, if you poll those in the black community, they may sit back and say, there isn't enough money, we think. Hey, I'm all open for that discussion. We don't think there may be too much police, whatever. I haven't heard that white supremacy, with all due respect, Claire, is the top tier issue facing the black community today here, Mike.
Well, I mean, in large measure, they've gotten some of the things that they wanted in terms of white supremacy. I mean, you look at the number of Confederate monuments, for example, that have come down in the state. That's certainly an indication that things are happening to their benefit. If you look at some of the appointments that Ron DeSantis has made of people of color, in a number of positions, they are getting some of the things that they want. So while white supremacy isn't at the top of their list of long-term concerns, that doesn't mean they don't live it every day, and they don't have to experience the fact that they're black every day. And that's something that Republican voters should probably take into account and look at when they're formulating their policies, because you just can't walk in somebody else's shoes.
Where's this?
Hold on. Understand how it feels to be.
Where's this white supremacy in the state of Florida that seems to be, prevailing in all these areas?
It's not white supremacy.
Okay.
It is the way the system works that makes it more difficult for black people to succeed. And there's no doubt that that's the case when you look at the suspension rates of African-American students in schools. When you look at, the way the communities are policed.
Now, see, to what Mike just said, that is, with all due respect, that is more plausible because it's based on an issue. When you just throw up white supremacy, I'm sitting back going, what do you see white supremacy in the black communities? You don't see that.
White supremacy is implemented in our system. It's systemic racism. One in 4 black men in Florida could not vote before Amendment 4 because of the felony disenfranchisement law. We look at all these different metrics. We look at education, health, poverty, incarceration, all of these things, they disproportionately impact the black community. And that is what, and police violence. I mean, are these protests just happening because people are making this stuff up?
This is a boogeyman issue. I mean, excluding maybe cities like Jacksonville, which is run by a Republican.
I mean, have you seen the shooting footages?
I have, and I'm all understand that, but that's not happening left and right. Having said this, the majority of towns, I'm not trying to make this partisan, but the majority of cities where the crime, Wall Street Journal came out 2 months ago, biggest increase in crime, 36 out of the 50 cities, majority all run by Democrats. You mean over the last 40 to 50 years have towns run by white and black mayors? You mean to tell me that somehow it's still an issue of race, even though the policies of implementation of taxpayer dollars, if you wanted to sit back and say it hasn't flown through like it should be, I'm all open for that discussion. But to sit here and say the reason why crime is increasing is Trump and racism, that's even the Biden poll numbers aren't buying into that.
Crime was increasing because of racism, but you could argue that crime is increasing because of the pandemic, because when people are under pressure and people are suffering economically, crime always goes up.
But I thought they were before the pandemic.
But they certainly were, but they're suffering more.
Guys, just to be clear, guys, crime is not increasing, by the way.
The murder rate, I'm sorry.
In 50 years. So,
the murder rate has increased doubled in many cities.
And in large measure, crime has gone down because so many people between the mid-90s and the mid-2010s were simply incarcerated for their crimes. I mean, Chain Gang Charlie, for example, Charlie Chris, it was the perfect example of lock them up. And that was the policy for 25 years, was to lock those up convicted of crimes. And that's one of the reasons why the crime rate is so much lower now.
Mike, I want to get to the BLM protests. The numbers are going down. But by the way, we had a story at FloridaDaily.com. The biggest, outside of women, by the way, of buying guns, the biggest group from year to year now has been those in the black community, Mike, buying handguns for protection.
Yeah, and
not from the cops, by the way, either.
It should not come as a big surprise that that's happening, because I mean, if you look at the increase in the amount of gun sales and the amount of anxiety that's out there in the public right now over both the economy and the pandemic, it shouldn't come as any surprise.
All right, let us go to the BLM protest. I have on my morning show, I get in complaints with some of the conservatives. Let me throw this out here. I want to play some of the clips here. That a lot of the protests are happening, for the most part, in violence. The left-wing cities. You know, you got states like Wisconsin. Okay, it can be a flip state. It was in 2016. But for the most part, it's a Democrat state. It's happening in Portland. It's happening in Seattle out there. It doesn't seem to be translating, for example, here in the state of Florida. If you had violence taking place in a lot of cities, then I think that this would be a big win for Trump. I still think it can be. Listen to the, who is this, by the way? The BLM protest out here where, let me see.
Some evidence.
This is Mike Smerconish from CNN. The numbers are showing that the BLM protest coinciding with Biden and the violence, people are not supporting this. Listen to this clip.
But some evidence suggests it is having some impact. That in a CBS YouGov nationwide survey, a plurality of Americans, 44%, said recent attention given to issues of discrimination is too much. According to a Marquette Law School poll, Biden's lead was down between June and August among Wisconsin likely voters. At the same time, perceptions of Black Lives Matter were worsening. And there's been significant decline in support for protesters.
Why are those numbers going down?
I mean, because there's been violent incidents. And, you know, in reality, these are few compared to the numbers of people who have been peacefully protesting. But every single time we have violence that is going to hit the news, it's going to make a big splash. At the same time, you have Trump and other talking heads who are consistently saying that Black Lives Matter is a hate group. I mean, I see that all over the internet. And so, I mean,
I've
over
heard their
time,
clips. They want to see things burn. We played the clips here before.
People who support equality among races, I don't think are generally wanting to burn down cities.
You know, Mike, I find it interesting. We played some of the clips on the morning show. We got some stories at FloridaDaily.com where I got to give it to them. They're trying to do this reverse psychology that if you see violence going on, which has been happening with the unfortunate death of George Floyd, this is all Trump's fault right now. But yet, the majority of those being polled are saying, no, we're coinciding this. I'm not blaming Biden, by the way, but they're coinciding with Biden, who now had to come out of the basement, some reporters are saying. Their numbers are showing that the protests are not working. Some are saying that maybe even Biden misjudged all of this. The BLM protests, the violence, Trump blaming. Where all does this go, Mike?
Well, I mean, what's most fascinating to me is, did the Democrats just hand the state of Wisconsin to President Trump and his reelection bid because of this violence. I'm fascinated to see how this violence plays out in the electorate at large, because I do believe that in large measure, the more violence that you see on television, the more you're likely to elect a president that's promising law and order. So, I mean, if you go back to the 1968 election, for example.
Well before all of our time, by the way.
Y'all love that 68 election, don't you?
I mean, Richard Nixon ran as a law and order candidate and won that way. And I'm fascinated to see if and what kind of impact this violence plays. I mean, there's so far to go now between the today and the election. I mean, are my children in school and do I have a job? That's going to be the two most important factors.
I agree.
In terms of who's elected the next president. But how this violence manifests itself amongst the electorate, I'm fascinated to see.
Here's CNN Don Lemon. I got to tell you, I like watching it because Don Lemon. But the clips from Lemon and Cuomo. This is in July of this past year. I got two clips I want to play. They're making fun of those criticizing the BLM protest. Here's the clip.
Democratic cities are in chaos right now. Is this what you want from Joe Biden? And they're going to take your country away, and they're taking down the statues. And
crime is rising as they defund police.
Oh, my gosh, it's so bad. And they get defunding police.
Here was Don Lemon a week and a half ago.
Guess what? The rioting has to stop. Chris, as you know and I know, it's showing up in the polling. Mm-hmm. It's showing up in focus groups. It is the only thing right now that is sticking.
Who's doing the protest? Is it Black Lives Matter?
I mean, people who
is it Trump planning people? Is it Antifa? Who is it?
People who advocate for racial equality, that includes numerous groups. The ones that get the attention certainly are people who are associated with anti-fascism and people who believe in Black Lives Matter. But it is a diverse group of people who are going to the streets in cities across the country.
Okay, I don't know who these other groups are.
And then some of them, after dark, yes, there are some bad actors. And the violence and the looting and the vandalism, I mean, these are things that are really reflecting poorly on the cities in which they're taking place. And they are certainly turning Republicans and people in the middle against the entire cause. I mean, it's doing a disservice.
Here is Joe Biden on the violence.
But I think it's important that we take note of.
Oh, by the way, no, that's not the one. Here's the one with Joe Biden. Let me get to this clip right here. Here was Biden here on the protest. Here's the clip.
Protesting brutality is a right and absolutely necessary, but burning down communities is not protest. It's needless violence.
All right, let us go back to the other clips right here, Mike. This was Lee Carter. She's a pollster for Muslansky and I don't know who the other group she's with. Muslansky and Carter. I don't remember which one it was. She says that she thinks that Biden, he's starting to come out now, starting to address this. She thinks that that they misjudged the numbers. Listen to this.
But I think it's important that we take note of this shift on the violence. And I think that his campaign might have misjudged how important it was to the American people and what it meant behind it. I think a lot of people on the left were thinking that if you were concerned about violence, if you're concerned about law and order, that also meant that you did not support Black.
You know, Mike, I'm the first one to admit, I didn't think this was going to be a big issue unless it was happening here in Florida. Guess what? It must be an issue. The Democrats are now starting to address it. Is Biden a little bit too late?
Oh, I mean, it depends. For example, he could go to Portland tomorrow and help his own cause and not be too late, but I haven't seen any indication that he plans to do that. And the reason why you're seeing this become more of an issue than you thought is because it's on our television screens on the network news every night. And so as long as it continues to do that, it's going to continue to be a huge issue.
Claire, it seems like it's going to be a huge issue, but again, I keep hearing a lot of the media laying the blame of all this at Trump.
He definitely has some part of the blame for sowing the seeds of racial division. I mean, he's used it to his benefit since he was a candidate the first time around. There's no doubt about that. You can't blame him for everything, though. Right. That's ridiculous. I mean, it's just like too many people to blame. It's so easy to just blame one person. Where you hear him blaming Joe Biden for the state of America today. How does that make any sense? The man hasn't been in office for 3 years.
Who is to partially blame them for the riots in Ferguson under Obama, for the riots in Baltimore? I don't blame Obama. But I mean, it happened under
but
Obama.
Was Obama sowing the seeds of racial division?
Well, who was doing it then? Trump wasn't. I mean, Trump wouldn't even run for office at that time.
This has been ongoing in America since slavery.
Then how can Trump be to blame then? Oh, he was just,
Can he take partial blame? I mean, look, the people.
Can Obama take partial blame?
People look to the president for guidance,
right?
And instead of calming things down, he escalates it. I mean, just yesterday he was going off about these crazy people who were with weapons all over them, getting on airplanes and flying in to do violence. I mean, for one, you're not getting on a plane like that. And for two, it's not happening. So, I mean, like, what is his point of doing that? His point is to make people afraid of other people.
Mike, you know where I find this to be interesting here? And yes, Trump can get some of the blame, quite a bit, for the huge deficit going up. But I'm also sitting back going, well, wait a second. The same people that are throwing Trump under the bus are the same people that are giving out $3 trillion packages for corona relief, like the Democrats. And by the way, the Republicans have jumped in on this as well. Another $1 trillion here. I mean, we got $5 trillion we're going to be spending the next several months. Trump's response, but yet these are the same people that support the shutdowns, which has led to the recession as well. I mean, this is like a construction project. Everything is all over the map. Nobody wants to take any responsibility.
Well, let's get some drawings then.
Yeah.
Let's go by the actual plan. But the answer to your question in terms of who's to blame, it's the police unions. I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that the police unions in this country have enough power, and they're a union. So their job is to not only protect the best officer, but their job is to protect the worst officer. It's to protect all of them.
Kind of like school teachers.
When Ferguson happened, there was no way they were going to let these officers just hang out to dry by the public. And now the exact same thing is happening in the Floyd case and in the Salathis Melvin case right here in Orlando, where there's still daily protests over the shooting of an armed man that was running away from police back on August 8th.
All right. I find this to be a fascinating topic. And again,
it is.
I mean, if it was happening in Florida, Mike, I would say these numbers would go one way or for another. But I mean, to sit back and usually when you talk to people, Claire, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in California? But now they are seeing these things kind of trickle over here. And that's the reason why I kind of find this as interesting where the BLM numbers are starting to go down here.
It's a national issue for sure.
Real quick, go ahead.
I'd like to make just one more point if I could, and that is the reason why BLM numbers in small measure are going down is because when the killing of George Floyd happened, it was a big wake-up call for America, both white and black. And white America was ready to make the kinds of reforms and changes that would stop police from killing unarmed men. But if the Black Lives Matter movement is going to insist on a host of other changes,
another good point.
That's where the support will begin to fall off amongst the average American.
I would agree with you on that. It's kind of like the teachers' unions, school safety, and next thing you know, we're trying to make it about race. Oh my word! Which I'm all over for the discussion, but what does it have to do with school safety? All right, I got it.
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Mike Synan. Many of you know him, the face, used to be the chief political correspondent for Fox News 35. By the way, I say this even though he works for us. I can listen to the guy tell stories about government waste. By the way, on both sides, phenomenal stories. And of course, Claire Goforth, the very, it's not infamous. If you call me infamous, it's a compliment. No, very famous and notorious, the BIG. Anyway, for the Daily Dot, she's a very well-known political reporter, and read her articles as well, thedailydot.com. Also hear her on NPR. Another great edition. By the way, for all your news, you can read Mike and all of us at floridadaily.com. That's floridadaily.com. This is Florida Daily TV. I am your host, publisher, Ed Dean. We'll see you next time.